Greetings, everyone. How are you? My name is Ramona LaRoche, and I'm reaching out to everyone from the African American Research Library and Cultural Center here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're part of the Broward County Library System, and we want to welcome you to our celebration tonight as we discuss ancestral veneration. We'll be talking about some of our cemeteries throughout Florida, here in the South, as well as some other parts of the state. I have some very wonderful guests tonight that I've worked with both directly and indirectly. And we all have this love of cemeteries, or what we call ancestral burial grounds. Here at the library, I do genealogy as well. So when people want to do their research, one of the things that we often have people do is see what they can find out in their local cemeteries. Maybe they have a family plot, etc., and it might give them some more clues in terms of what they're researching around their families. So tonight, I'm honored to have a few guests. Right now, two of my guests are on. We are expecting two more. We hope they'll join us, but we understand this is a busy month, particularly because it is Black History Month and it's the last day of the month. And many of us are very tired because we've been presenting and teaching and training all throughout the month. So this is our last day, and we're going to take it out with a big bang. So let me begin by saying a couple of things. I want to open up tonight also to tell you that this is a dedication to one of our elders that we lost over the last year, Mrs. Hazel Armbruster of Pompano Beach, Florida. She ran a historical society there, and my first time that I did this program in 2018, she was one of our featured guests here in our auditorium, and she brought us information about the cemeteries in Pompano and just a wealth of information. So we're dedicating our program tonight to her memory. So on the channel right now, I have with me two guests. I have Dr. Antoinette Jackson from the University of South Florida. She is the department chair of the anthropology department. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I have it all right. I don't have her bio in front of me because I'm trying to just go by memory and my heart and what my heart tells me. But what I do know about that Dr. Jackson is at one point she was very involved with the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor, which ranges from Jacksonville, North Carolina, through four states: North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. And she was on that commission. She served as a commissioner. And I also know that she's been doing some awesome work around cemetery historical research, cemetery veneration, and just keeping a database of all these wonderful places that our people are buried. The other thing I know this year is that there was a special committee that was formed with the Florida State um, Assembly House or something, and they've had these special meetings. I think there were four of them, and I know that she served on as a chairperson on that as well, or a member of that committee. I'm sorry, and I'm sure she'll be able to tell us a little bit about that too. It's interesting that it was kind of coined or phrased as this committee for abandoned African American cemeteries, but what we were told and shared by one of our elders on the committee was that many times people think that African American cemeteries are abandoned, but they actually are not. They're just kept in different kind of ways that other people don't necessarily think that people still take care of them and stuff. But we'll probably talk more about that. My other guest that I have on today is Roberto Fernandez, and he's with History Broward. I first met him a few years ago at a cemetery. It was an honor for Reuben Stacy. Reuben Stacy was lynched in, I believe, 1935, if I'm correct. And it happened right here in Broward County. And we met at the cemetery where he's buried. And they were having a program around it. We did a soil retention ceremony where people actually lifted soil and put it in these receptacles, and then they were shipped down to the anti-lynching museum in Alabama, if I'm correct. And
That's
so
correct.
that's how we first met. And then Roberto and I have kept in touch ever since. He's doing some exciting work with young people, high school students. They're in the cemeteries, they're researching, they're going to historical societies and other places where repository records are kept with regards to those cemetery burial places. So he's going to tell you a little bit more about, what he's been doing. So I guess we can get started. We'll start with Roberto. Roberto, can you just kind of add to what I've said and share with us what you're doing and give us an update what's been happening, I guess, over the last year since we last met and talked?
So the past, I guess since last February, we completed between last February and May of last year, we completed a survey that we did at Woodlawn Cemetery of all the veteran markers at Woodlawn. So we were actually going through and documenting, we were photographing all of the veteran markers. We were actually we actually started requesting military records from the National Archives and Records Administration because they would be public record and historical documents. And we also requested death certificates for some of the veterans in an effort to try to learn more about the individuals and their stories. Unfortunately, because of COVID and delays on the, up there in NARA, the military records basically have not gotten to us. I actually received my first response from the National Archives a week ago with regards to our request for military records. So I'm assuming it's going to start being a slow trickle of these documents coming in. So we'll request records when we can. And we will, try to do the best we can to learn more about these individuals and their military service in that way. And then with the start of the current school year, we haven't been able to do much with the historical cemeteries. And a big part of that is due to a lack of um, grants that are available for students to do service projects throughout the community. We depended heavily on a state-sponsored grant, but that grant has kind of fallen through at the moment. So that's kind of where we stand with that. Um, as far as like personally, I've actually visited 2 historic cemeteries. I collaborated with a gentleman here in Broward called Emmanuel George, and he was up uh, last year, and he told me he found a black cemetery up in Lake Wales, and so I kind of drove up right before his last day of work up there, and I actually documented Willow Lawn Cemetery, which is the black cemetery in Lake Wales, and completed like photographs and stuff like that, and submitted those documents to the Florida Master Site File. I actually submitted those last week. It took me a while to get all that data and kind of put everything together. And then in July, I visited a black cemetery up in Gainesville. And the connection with the Gainesville cemetery is actually, it's the cemetery where um, Sylvia Aldridge, a very important African-American woman here in South Florida and in Broward in particular, who established several businesses. She established an employment agency for Black women. She established the first taxi cab company. And so I actually wanted to see if her stone was actually up there at the Rooter Branch Cemetery. And so I did find her grave. And I'm in the process of trying to like write up all the findings from that trip to um, include the Rooter Branch Cemetery in the Florida Master Site File because currently it's not there. So, kind of like a little bit of stuff with students, but then a little bit more with kind of like independent research of the black cemeteries. So, that's my brief update.
Can you, Roberto, can you tell us a little bit about the students, how long you've been working with the students, and what kind of response do you get from your students? What are their ages, grades, or something like that?
So when it comes to the students, I started the service project with the students back in 2014. They're mostly high school age students, so ninth through 12th grade. And one of the big things we started doing was going to document the headstones at Woodlawn Cemetery because, there was a concern initially that the state might kind of push into the cemetery when they expanded Interstate 95. And so the kids are like, well, let's go write down the name of all the headstones in case they have to pave that over. Unfortunately, through a lot of advocacy from the Jurors Homeowners Association and Mickey Hinton and a lot of members of the community, the Florida Department of Transportation deeded that land that was actually part of their right of way to the city of Fort Lauderdale, and they no longer own a portion of the Woodlawn Cemetery. So the students have done archival research, they've done oral history interviews, they've also done historic preservation work of like cleaning the headstones and stuff like that. So that's been a big focus and a big kind of like push for us with the
Great,
students.
great. Now, when they're doing the cleaning and so forth, is there someone that's professionally training them, or are you doing that yourself, or how does that
I
work?
I'm the one that's actually professionally training them, and I was taught by Dr. Michelle Williams, who was the director of the Florida Public Archaeology Network office down here.
Uh,
Um, and she kind of taught me, and she goes, here's what you use and here's how you do it. And so she goes, now that you know, you can go ahead and teach the students. So that's how I've done it for a while. So yeah, I
okay,
was trained, and the kids are trained on how to do it, safely and professionally, and to preserve. We don't want to destroy these sacred sites, and we're definitely not painting anything, or
right.
everything is appropriate.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that you're definitely not painting it, because unfortunately, some of our cemetery um, overseers do believe that some of our stones should be painted, and I've actually talked to a couple of them here in our area. So
Right,
I'm glad that you point that out, because a lot of people think that headstones, gravestones should be painted, and we know as historic preservationists that's something that should not be done. I want to
right.
take a moment now, and I want to welcome Dr. Enid Pinkney. I see that she has joined us. And Dr. Pinkney, thank you so much. I did put you on mute as you were setting up, so let me unmute you. Okay, so this is Dr. Enid Pitney, and she comes to us from the Brownsville section of Miami, Florida. And she's an amazing historic preservationist. She's done a lot, but what the two things that I know about her is that she actually saved the historic Hampton House after it had been derelict for about 20 years. So that's one of the major things I know about her. The other thing I know is that she is going to tell us maybe a little bit about Lemon City Cemetery and also the Lincoln Cemetery, because I don't see Mr. Jesse Wooten as yet. I'm hoping he's going to join us, but I'm not sure. And then finally, also, I know that she's an amazing dancer, because we celebrated her birthday not too long ago, last fall, and she doing the ceremony of the Junkanoo, she was dancing, and I have her on video. So that's what I know. Some of the beautiful things I know about Dr. Pickney. So welcome, Dr. Pickney.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear
So
me?
I can, yes, we can hear you
Okay.
fine. So what we were doing basically, we started out by we let Roberto give us an update of his organization, History Broward, and he works with high school students, and they've been doing restoration and research and so forth. So he just finished up. Um, so Dr. Pickney, I'm going to ask you to come on next, and if you can tell us a little bit about your historic preservation work around cemeteries or sacred burial grounds here in South Florida.
Well, back in 2009, someone came to me and said that the city of Miami had given these developers permission to build three affordable housing apartments on this site. And as they were digging up the ground, preparing for the buildings, they discovered human bones, but the people were questioning as to whether they were human bones. And they felt that they were human bones. So, and they felt also that someone should do something about it. So they came to me and said that they felt I should give leadership to stopping these developers from building on this abandoned Black cemetery. I really did not want to get involved in that because I was so involved in working on the Hampton House, and I didn't need anything that was a problem. And I felt that, fighting against the city and the developers was going to be a little too much of, I didn't want to handle that. So then a group of people that came to me and said that I had given leadership to stopping developers from being developers for the Circle in downtown Miami, and that now this is a Black project and I don't have time. So that made me feel a little guilty. So I said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do, I'll take it to the African American Committee of Dade Heritage Trust, and let's see what they say. And so I did. And they said that, well, we should look into it. So we had a meeting to decide whether we would get involved with trying to stop developers from building these 3 apartments on the site. And we had a meeting, and at this meeting, I saw some white people there. I saw one white person that I knew, but then there were a couple of others that I didn't know. And then I saw some Black people who weren't members of the organization, but it's open to the public, so everybody could come. We in fact, we look for more members. But then what I realized was that somehow the developers had found out we were having a meeting, and it sent people to the meeting to see what we were saying. And plus, they had hired a Black lawyer to come to the meeting. And we decided that we would support the stopping of building the affordable housing on the property. So they were saying we didn't have proof that this had been a cemetery. And that was true. And so that word got out, and a man by the name of Larry Wiggins sent me 523 names of persons that had been buried in the Lemon City Cemetery. And he got that from, he's a genealogist, and he got that information from the Mormons' website. Evidently, they have the best records.
Right.
And so I used that to say that had been a cemetery. And then he sent me something else from, which showed the directions of the Lemon City Cemetery from the courthouse to where it's located. So he gave me some information to back up the authority that this was a cemetery. So then I said, well, you can't, that's disrespectful to put these buildings on the cemetery, on this cemetery. But they had already started on the building. And the one building was halfway finished. And so I got a pro bono attorney to help me with handling this. His name is Thomas Matcove. And so we worked out something that we had to have an agreement with the with the city of Miami and the developers. And so we said that since the one building was halfway finished, that we would let that building go up, but the other two had to go. We didn't want to let that happen. That was not to take place. So they agreed to that. And then we also said that we wanted the rest of the property to become a memorial garden. And we want a monument on the property with the 523 names of those persons that had been buried there. And so the developers agreed to do that. And then after that, another family came up and said that they had two relatives buried there that were not on the list. After it was built, so we said, well, we couldn't put those two names on the memorial monument, but we wanted also to have the human bones that had been dug up from there that were at the medical examiner's office to be placed back in the cemetery. However, the developers wanted the human bones to be placed in a regular cemetery rather than the Lemon City Cemetery. And I said, no, they came from the Lemon City Cemetery, so I want to see them back in the Lemon City Cemetery. And as the word got out about the finding of the Lemon City Cemetery, people started calling me to find out if their relatives had been buried there. And a doctor, I think his name was Hollington Hanner. He was from the Hanner Hasty family. And he called to see if his grandfather had been buried there. And I said that I would look it up. What was his name? So he said his name was James Cunningham. And as I was looking for James Cunningham in the list of names, I found John Clark. John Clark was my grandfather.
Wow.
But I never knew him. But I knew of him because he died before I was born. And my grandmother talked about him all the time, but she never said where he was born. So I didn't know that. And I didn't even know there was a Lemon City until this whole thing came up.
Okay.
And, and as I looked at it, I said, I wonder if this is my grandfather. And as I read the entire information listed on the death certificate, where it said spouse, it had Melvina Clark. And that was my grandmother. That was the person who raised me. And so I knew that was true. That was my grandfather. And so that helped me to become more invigorated about what I was doing. And then the people who said they wanted their family name out there in the memorial garden, what we decided to do about that was that when we reinterred the human bones, that we on the headstone we would have that family's names there.
Okay.
And we had a reinterment service, and we had a program with the mayor of the city of Miami, and the developers participated. in that program. Now, since we have done all of that, John, let's see, someone who works at Carl Gable's museum, and then I think his
The
name
director, John, yeah. The
John
director.
Adam. Yeah, okay. He has done some research on Dr. Farr. And he found out Dr. Farr was an undertaker in Miami many years ago. And he found out that Dr. Farr buried, I think he said about 700 people out there in the Lemon City Cemetery. And we didn't know that. So now the Lemon City Cemetery Community Corporation wants to come up with something else that we could put out there in the Lemon City Cemetery in memory of those people who have not been recognized. So that's another thing that we have to work on. So our work isn't finished. We're trying to figure out how we're going to do this and where the help is coming from. And that's about, what our story on the Lemon City Cemetery.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that insight, Dr. Pinkney. When was the actual ceremony of the reinterment? When did it take place, the ceremony?
I think, when was that? That was, I think that was, let's see, in 2000, I don't know if it was around 2011 or somewhere
okay.
up in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
we can get it later. I just was kind of curious to know what the time frame was from the first time the developers made the attempt, your response, and how long it kind of took. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why later.
Okay.
So just an update. I just got a message from Mrs. Gloria Battle. She will not be joining us to talk about the Deerfield Cemetery. Unfortunately, she had a dental emergency. And Jesse Wooden said he's trying to connect. So hopefully he'll be joining us.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So I'm going to now, if I may, ask Dr. Jackson to join us. Dr. Jackson, as I said earlier, she joins us from the University of South Florida, where she serves as the chairwoman of the anthropology department. She also recently was on a special appointed committee on abandoned African American cemeteries here in Florida. And the committee met, I think, 4 or 5 times with public hearings, and she served on that. And she also has created, her and her team have created an amazing database relative to the burials of African and Caribbean Americans around the state, I believe. It might be even nationally, but she'll tell us more. Okay, it is nationally. Okay, Dr. Jackson, if I may.
Yes, thank you. It's an honor, first of all, to be on the panel, and especially with Dr. Pinkney. So I have heard so many good things, and I'm so happy to have a chance to meet you directly. So nice to meet you. But it's a pleasure being on the panel because this work that you all are actually doing in specific cemeteries really kind of echoes some of the work that and some of the reasons that I became excited about and reinvigorated into doing work specifically on cemeteries. As Dr. LaRoche knows, I did, in her intro earlier, she mentioned my connection with the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission, and I served as on the inaugural commission, and for like over close to 9 years on that commission. And my work, I always tell people, often I find myself in cemeteries. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I did much of my research in plantation communities throughout the Southeast region. And in order to really learn about the history and heritage of many of the communities that I worked in, I did a lot of work with people and families and communities in cemeteries, because that is where a lot of the history of Black folk are kept and preserved and honored. So this time I'm actually in this work now, I'm actually focused directly on cemeteries, not indirectly. So, which brings me to the work I'm doing now. One of the things I'm doing is directing a project called the African American Burial Ground Project here in Tampa, Florida. And we are focused on 4 cemeteries. One, Zion Cemetery, that many folk might have heard of, who is a cemetery that is underneath a housing complex, Robles Park housing complex. And one of the things my team and I are doing or trying to address the living people in communities that are impacted by the finding and discovery starting in 2018 of the fact, or the confirmation, the reconfirmation that there was indeed a cemetery there. And indeed, the housing complex sat over top of it. And as you all kind of laid out, Roberto and Dr. Pinkney laid out for the cemeteries you're working with, people, the records are there. The information is often there, and sometimes people go ahead and build over top of these cemeteries, unfortunately, anyways. And then it's a fight to stop the development from continuing over and over again. So that is our charter. So Zion Cemetery is one such site in Tampa with over 700 graves with Black folk buried there. That now efforts are underway to memorialize that site and figure out what to do next. And then we are also working on 3 cemeteries in the St. Petersburg area, Oaklawn, Evergreen, and Moffett, that are sitting primarily underneath I-275 and the Tropicana Field, which is a baseball team's parking lot. So once again, these 3 cemeteries are Black cemeteries. In some form or the other. They were, at one point, one was a Civil War cemetery that buried Black and white folk. That was Moffett, and then eventually it ended up being a predominantly Black African American cemetery. And then Oaklawn is a cemetery segregated by area. Part of the cemetery, there's a section for Black folk in that cemetery. And then the Evergreen Cemetery was a totally African American cemetery by design. And when they designed it, it was African American cemetery. And all this was because of segregation, as we all know. So those are 4 cemeteries that we are actually working on, interviewing people and families, and not only learning about the cemeteries, but also learning about the communities that were also, part of the infrastructure of that area. And that has also been covered over and buried and erased. And using the term erasure as opposed to abandon is something that we are really using when we do our work. And one of the things that when I joined the task force, it's such a span. So those 3 cemeteries led me to do the work that got attention of the task force that was being formed in the state, the task force on abandoned African American cemeteries at the state level, because of the issues that we're all here on this panel talking about, some of the erasure and some of the lost information about these cemeteries. The task force was set up to figure out the scope of that throughout the state of Florida, and what things can be put in place to stop that kind of thing from happening any longer, and then also to understand the magnitude of what has already been done, and to educate people about these kinds of cemetery sites. So the task force was a 10-person task force, and actually I was on representing not only my area of expertise as a cultural anthropologist and working on some of these cemeteries that I mentioned, but also because I was representing the Council of Churches throughout the state. And one of the major places where we are learning about these sites are, as you all know, and I'm speaking into the choir again, is through churches and and their connections to people and communities and families buried there. So making that a stronger link in terms of, and a stronger voice in these conversations about what to do about these cemetery sites. So the task force on which is called Abandoned African American Cemeteries, when it was started last year, was tasked with doing a report to the legislator to the governor about what to do, what our suggestions were. And so we completed our work December of 2021, passed that report, which is also on the site, on the website, the state website, about our recommendations. And so right now we're waiting for the governor and for the legislation to go through, the recommendations to go through the legislator, and hopefully we will come on the other side with an actual bill kind of outlining some or taking up some of our recommendations. So we're waiting right now. And that legislation was introduced by Senator Fentress, Representative Fentress Driscoll out of the Tampa Bay area, and also Senator Cruz. So they were the ones championing that legislation. It's now called HB 1215 and SB 1588. Those are the bills that are pending decisions by the governor based on the task force's recommendations. So, and it's called the Abandoned and Historic Cemeteries Act at this point. And that's what they're weighing in on. And so it has some really very meaningful things that will help preserve some of the cemeteries that we're talking about in this state. And then finally, the bigger thing that I'm doing and my team are doing is working, because of all of the things that are going on nationally as well as in the state, developed the site called the Black Cemetery Network, which is a place, and I invite everybody listening and everybody on this call who haven't entered their site or entered the site onto the Black Cemetery Network to feel free to take a look, go out there and look at the Black Cemetery Network. And it is a place that captures across the country where sites are that people are, that have been erased or marginalized or underfunded or in some, and a celebration, really. It's a celebration to put these sites and people working on this work in conversation with each other, locally and nationally. So it is, if you look at the site, it's a very beautiful site that my team constructed. And it's also to pay homage to these sacred spaces and to really recognize how meaningful they are, and that Black cemeteries are Black history, and just give everybody, local communities, as well as really maybe well-funded communities, a chance to enter their site on the network and be in conversation with other people who are doing a similar work, or who they may want to or solicit help from other people if they if they need that. And so this is it's a wonderful platform, and I'm very proud of the fact that this is out there as a resource for all of us who are really committed to this type of work. So again, the Black Cemetery Network is the kind of culmination of the work that my team started with the African American Burial Ground Project. And then as a result of that, I thought we should put this in conversation with other folk who are doing this nationally, because it's unfortunately not just isolated to Florida, where these issues are that we are seeing and where work is needed. And so those are some of the things, the big kind of things that I'm involved in. And again, I'm just happy to be on the panel to just offer up that resource, and just, again, can't say enough about how much I personally have learned as a result of working with people and communities around cemeteries, and how much passion I have about helping others to make those kinds of connections with each other around this type of work. I think we're at a really critical moment, and I really feel that many things are going to shift as a result of the work that we all have been called to do. So just excited to be part of this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. I want to just remind our audience that if you would like to put questions or comments, you can put it in the chat box, and we'll try our best to respond. We have a little more time. So a couple of things that I'm kind of thinking about as the three of you shared. One thing, this idea of reinterment, and Dr. Pinckney mentioned that originally the I guess the establishment, the powers that be, they wanted to put the bones somewhere else. We had a very similar experience in Charleston, South Carolina. I worked with Dr. Ade Ofunyin, the grandson of Philip Simmons, the famous blacksmith from Charleston. And back in 2013, they were remodeling the Gilliard Auditorium in downtown Charleston, and they came across 31 skeletal remains of African descended people. And the response also was, okay, we will put them in another cemetery somewhere else. But with the leadership of Dr. O, and I have to honor his name because we lost him a year ago, October, unfortunately. So Ashe, my big brother, Ashe, we miss you. With his direction, we had community meetings, and we started at the library. We started showing the film of the African burial ground in New York City, and we showed the process, and we taught the community in Charleston what the New Yorkers had done in order to save the African burial ground in the lower Manhattan, where at least 400 skeletal remains were taken out, they were studied, and then they were reinterred. But we know that's the tip of the iceberg. We know that there were many more Black people, Native American people buried under that area. And now it's run by the National Park Service, and they have an interpretive center. You can go there and visit. You can pay homage to the mounds, and the wonderful sculpture that they have, etc., related to it. The other thing that's interesting is that I have a friend who actually did the landscape architect for this place, and she made mounds. So they made 4 mounds because we know that in years from now, graves sink. So the mounds were made purposely large because we know in years from now they will be sinking, sinking, sinking. So those why the mounds are actually these large humps, 4 humps representing the people there. So, but going back to Charleston, so the community fought, we taught and fought and taught and demanded. And I have to say that in 2018, we reinterred the 31 skeletal remains after researching. We did DNA research on them. We connected with the University of Tennessee, and we did forensic DNA studies on the bones that were found. And then we also did DNA studies on any Gullah Geechee person that was living in or from Charleston, to see whether we could find some connections between those people that were buried there and the people that now live there. We were able to identify the 31 remains. Some had been born in Africa. We were able to figure out the area, and some had been born there in the Charleston area. So there's a full report available, and that's information we can get to anybody that would like to see that later. Um, so just in terms of how so important it is to that we demand that we want our people to be rested where they were rested. We don't want them to be shoveled up and taken someplace and dumped somewhere else, at maybe another Black church or wherever, because that has happened a lot. It has happened a lot, and it's happened because of, like Roberto said earlier, Highway 90, highways 95s cutting through cemeteries all up and down, highways cutting through our communities up and down the United States. So it's really important that when we find our sites, that we get them identified and that we teach our young people the values. That's why it's so important, the work that our instructors like Roberto is doing and so forth, because our young people need to know. I got an art grant in Charleston, and I worked with 6 young people. They were younger; they weren't high school; they were younger, and we gave them cameras in hand, and we went to about 4 Black cemeteries. We went to the local mortuary. We went to the headstone maker, and they got to learn about, okay, well, the military people, they may have a bronze headstone because they're military, and they got to see how the pictures were sandblasted on the headstones. And then we went to the family history room in Charleston, and they got to research. They found Civil War soldiers, members of the United States Army, colored troops. We found pictures, and it was just an amazing adventure. And I'm happy to say that a couple of those young people went on to do some very interesting stuff now, even in their college years. And I don't know if it was as a result of that, but certainly it opened up their mind to some other research, primary research and so forth. And a couple of them had never been in a cemetery. Initially, they were afraid, but after that, they were fine. They were fine. They learned about grave goods and, why we decorate graves a certain way in the Gullah Geechee land. And, it was just really nice. So,
if I may, Dr. LaRoche,
of course.
One of the good things that's kind of like quietly passing through the State House right now, there is a bill that is encouraging teachers and kind of like to encourage school districts to use African American cemeteries as a kind of like springboard into teaching local Black history. And so that's something that I am really looking forward to that passing, because that's something that I would love to be able to teach teachers and get more kids to kind of get out to our cemeteries and kind of do a little more local history and a lot more oral history and collect the data, because as the elders age and pass on, we don't have those stories anymore. And so I think it's important for us to have the kids involved in that. So very similar to that project you did in South Carolina is what I'm hoping this will do with us.
Yep. So let me ask Dr. Jackson if you would put the information in the chat, because I think you sent it to me privately. Would you mind putting it in the public chat, if you will? And also, Roberto, if you'd like to put any contact information or whatever, if you could put it in chat, so people can learn more about your efforts and what you're doing, or contact, whatever you're comfortable with sharing. Okay. And Dr. Pinkney, the same for you. If there's anything you'd like to share, you can put that in. And then, does anybody else have any comments or questions? Either from
I'll make a comment on another project that I worked on, and that's the city of Miami Cemetery. I'm trying. I can't remember the year. I'm 90 years old, so my memory isn't good.
Take your time. It's all right.
But anyway, Anne McFadden was writing a book on burials in the city cemetery. And so somebody asked her if she included the Black people. And she said, Black people, I didn't know Black people were buried in the city cemetery. And so they said, yes, I think Black people are buried in the city cemetery also. So, and they told her to contact me. Well, I think she contacted the Black Archives first, and they told her to contact me. And so because I had done research on burials in the city cemetery, and we found, I think, about 3,000 Black people had been buried in the city cemetery, but people didn't know that. And but it was segregated. It was the Blacks. They had a Black section of the city cemetery, and so she was going to write this book and not include the Black people because she didn't know that there were Black people buried there. And so she asked me if I would share that research with her in this book, so the book could be completed. And I told her that I would, but that I didn't want her to put the death certificate information that had what the Black people died with, because I knew people, especially people in Miami, they don't like their information about the cause of death published.
Right.
So I said she could do it if she excluded that information. She agreed to do that. And so the information was published in the book. And then when people heard about it, they came to me and asked, well, it was really WLRN, Channel 17. And they said, did I have any body in Miami who had Black people in Miami. Did I know of any Black people in Miami who had relatives buried in the city cemetery? So I said, yes. And they said, well, can you get us 20 people? And I said, yes, and meet them out at the cemetery so they could interview them. And they made we had this interview. And so we decided that what we would do, and some of the incorporators of the city of Miami were buried there. Some of the Black incorporators of the city of Miami were buried in that city cemetery. And so we realized that, this history was not known, and we had to do something about sharing that history with the community. So what we decided to do was to have a commemorative service in the city cemetery and place headstones at the African American incorporators of the city of Miami. And we did that for, I don't know, maybe each year we would put a headstone at one of the African American incorporators. And we did that for about 25 years until we got all of the headstones placed. And we had a procession, which we had, because, a long time ago, when we had funerals, we used to have a procession with a band. So we went back to that. We had a procession from St. Agnes Episcopal Church to the city cemetery. And then we had a service out there commemorating not only the incorporators, but some of the other people that were, for instance, we found out that one of the ink spots had been buried out there. So we had a service to celebrate his life, and which helped people to understand that that Black people, the reason I was so interested in doing it, because when I was a little girl, I went to a funeral of someone who had died in the Navy and was buried in the city cemetery. And I went to the city cemetery for the burial. And so I was interested in doing something to educate the community that Black people were buried in that city cemetery. And we need to celebrate that, and we need to let people know that we played a part in the establishment of the city of Miami. And so this is something that we used to do each year.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I learned so much in this hour. It's amazing. That's why I needed Dr. Pinkney to join us, because I know she was going to enlighten us with some great information. So, any other comments or questions from my panelists? Okay, I'm looking to see if we have any audience. Lou Lawson says, I'm not understanding. It says VYN. I'm not sure what that means. Mr. Lawson, if you can re-put that in again, I can, respond, but I don't quite understand it. I also wanted to, once again, I had mentioned earlier when we started that we were dedicating this program tonight to the honor of Mrs. Hazel Armbruster from Pompano Beach, Florida. So I want to take a moment again and just share with you a little bit about the legacy of Mrs. Armbruster. She came to Pompano Beach in the early 50s and set to work. She was a farm worker, an educator, and a historian. She was named the city historian in 2017 for Pompano Beach and was instrumental in saving the Ali building, as well as founding the Rock Road Historical Society. So I just kind of wanted you to know a little bit about her, because, as I said, our first program that we did in 19 of February, for this particular group, she was on our panel, and we had 40 people attend out in our auditorium that year. So it's always nice to, honor our memories of people that started this work, because, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and our elders. And we too, now, some of us, as myself, am a young elder. So now I'm trying to pass on the baton as well. And I'm happy to say that it's been working. For example, we have a young man that most of you probably know, Emmanuel George. And I want to put a shout out to Emmanuel George. He's one of our community archivists, and we've been blessed with a grant from Florida International University. And he's working as a consultant with us for a 3-year grant project. And he's helping us with oral histories, and also to process the Dr. Niara Sudakis's collection. You may know that she was an anthropologist as well. She actually was born in Fort Lauderdale, and at the ripe age of 14 went to Fisk University. She went on to become the first Black female anthropologist professor at NYU in New York. She also was the president of Lincoln University at one point. When I first arrived here in 2018, she was still involved with us. She was at that time 83. She also had been our scholar in residence for a while. She passed away probably 2019, because it was prior to COVID, and we had a ceremony here in our gallery for her. Her son lives in, I believe, South Africa. He's still very involved, and we have an amazing collection of her stuff, and we're very happy that we're now beginning to process it, because it's a large collection. So we're pretty excited about that. So again, my shout out to Emmanuel George, and him hanging out with us, because he's doing some of the amazing community work around high schools that were torn down in Broward County. Um, he just launched a film that's going to be out very soon about one of the local high schools. And so I just wanted to share that with you. So we're at 626. I do want to say that we had invited a couple other people, but life gets in the way, and I understand. We know that February is a busy month for us Black people. Because everybody comes out the woodworks and wants us to present, present, present. But we have to keep telling them that Black history is 365 days, and just don't wait until a week before February to call us for a lecture. So again, we thank you so much. Again, I want to thank you, Dr. Pinckney, for joining us. I want to thank Dr. Jackson for finding time to put us put you in our schedule. I mean, put us in your schedule, because I know you're busy, and I appreciate it so much. And it's an honor to meet you, even though it's virtually. But I'm looking forward to meeting you soon in person. Roberto, thank you so much. Um, Roberto and I were supposed to meet at the Deerfield Cemetery the other day, and I had to work for early voting, so I couldn't be there. But he went, and Dr. excuse me, former Commissioner Battle was supposed to be on tonight, but she's the one that had the emergency. But that cemetery also is now a memorial park, and it's amazing. It's so beautiful. And I asked Roberto, could he try to go there before we met tonight, and he did. Roberto, would you like to share anything about your visit there?
I really loved how Afrocentric it was. There were baobab trees. Like something that we forget with Black cemeteries is that the trees matter, and that there's actually like a historical significance to marker trees in various African cultures. So like just walking around, like there were sculptures that had like different books with various Black authors. My eldest daughter, who's 11, like daddy, like screamed from across the park because she found one of the sculptures that says Zora Neale Hurston, and I had drug her out to Fort Pierce to actually go see the marker for Zora Neale Hurston in Fort Pierce. So she goes, "Oh, didn't we see her for Halloween?" I'm like, "Yes, we went up there to see." So it was just kind of cool to see her kind of respond to the public art. And I just thought it was really just well done. We were in conch shells, sculptures of conch shells, to kind of tie and connect to the Bahamian culture and to the use of conch shells as kind of like footstones or field stones for honored ancestors. So I really really enjoyed it. I thought it really paid a lot of respect to um, the African and the Black community that was there, um, and just really pulled in a lot of those Afrocentric elements from burial spaces and Black culture. So.
Yeah, and it was so nice because when we first met in 2019, it was just a sketch on the PowerPoint. And to see it come into fruition now, when you go there, it's such a nice place. They have chess tables where you can go and just meditate and play some chess. They also have a veterans area as well. And then they have these trees with leaves that actually blow in the wind with mirrors. So you can actually see your face reflected in these mirrors on the tree leaves. And then they have a wall with everybody's name that's buried. So it's really nice. And again, that's the Brunhilde Knowles Richardson Memorial Park in Deerfield Beach. Um, Dr. Pickney, would you like to say anything about Lincoln Cemetery?
Yes, I guess I can say something
Okay, thank
because
you.
it's right out here in our community.
Yes, ma'am.
It has gone through quite a bit of, I don't even know what you call it. It was owned by Dr. Kelsey Farr, and he was quite a leader in the community. And then it was he died, and then it was taken over by Mrs. Ellen Johnson, and it just got to be such, I don't know how to describe it because it needed so much help, and it just couldn't get the help. She tried to get people to pay what's the name of it, a fee, an annual fee for to take care of it, and people didn't pay it. Um, and then there were several people in the community who tried to do various projects to try to improve it, uh, to paint it, to paint the grave sites, the headstones, and it was always a problem. Then Mr. Jesse Wooten came along. His mother is buried there. My parents are buried there also, and my mother and my father. And he has done a magnificent job in keeping it clean and cutting the grass and improving it, making it look better, because it really was a sore site in the community. And uh, some people tried to get the county to take it over, and they didn't want to take it over because they said it would sort of represent their taking over private property. So Mr. Wooten is now trying to do the best he can with the improvement, and it is looking better. It's looking much better than it used to look. So I compliment Mr. Wooten for the job that he has done in its improvement. And I just plead to the community to help to work with him for continued improvement.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pickney. Well, we have come just about to 6:33. So I want to again thank my extended family here for joining me, um, for updating the community and each other about what we all are doing and involved with. And I think that it's a very exciting time for this kind of work. for a number of reasons. And I always say that when we take care of our ancestors continue to take care of us. So again, thank you, Dr. Pinckney. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. And thank you, audience, for joining. We were live on YouTube and Facebook. So it's recorded. So if your friends didn't join us today, you can tell them where they can find it and they can listen to it at another time. Thank you so much. And if there's
Thank
nothing
you.
else,
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you, Dr.
it.
LaRoche.
I
Oh,
really
thank
do.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody on the panel. Enjoyed it. Enjoy hearing.
all right. All right. Everyone take care, be safe, and happy Women's History Month. All right.
Bye.
Peace and blessings. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Oh, we're celebrating 20 years at the African American Research Library, and there's a list of activities. So if you come by, get a program, and we'll send you some information as well. We're doing Esther Rose play next month.
Oh,
Okay,
wonderful.
yeah, we'll be doing her play outside again, but it's a new rendition from last year. So that's the next scheduled activity. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening. Enjoy the rest of your day, your night. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Good night, everyone.
Bye. All right. Thank you.